This is Up Close. I'm Stephen I. Weiss. In this week's episode, we're looking at two memoirs of experience in authoritarian regimes. Is the story of Iran one that should leave you with hope? That's the message former New York Times reporter Nazila Fathi wants to give, even though she's living in exile because of threats of assassination. We discuss her memoir of growing up during and through the Iranian Revolution, The Lonely War, one woman's account of the struggle for modern Iran. And then, there's very little we know about life inside North Korea. And Suki Kim's memoir of being an English teacher to elite students there also shows us just a portion of it. But what she finds is eye-opening. Her book is Without You, There Is No Us, My Time with the Sons of North Korea's Elite. But first, here's my interview with Nazila Fathi. You were a journalist covering Iran from inside as someone who'd grown up there, as someone who'd been born there for the greater part of 20 years. But that came to a pretty abrupt halt in 2009. What happened?
Unfortunately. Well, as you remember, 2009 was when tens of thousands of Iranian, or millions, poured out on the streets to protest what appeared to be an election of the incumbent president, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. And a lot of people thought that the government had stolen the vote. Many people had voted for the other candidate. So they came out protesting the results of the elections. And I was there, I was covering it. The protests turned quite violent after the government tried to discourage people from coming out on the streets. And they also ordered reporters not to cover the protests. I was among the last reporters working for a foreign media outlet in Iran. I had received a couple of threats. Also, one guy told me that they'd given my picture to snipers to shoot me. But I didn't feel the threat until one day I was leaving my home and I noticed that some people were following me. I turned around and went home and didn't leave my apartment until the night that I went to the airport and left the country.
And for you, there was very much a personal story of upheaval around not just what in 2009 led you to exile, but going back 20 years prior to when the revolution first happened. And your family had been doing very well beforehand, and suddenly you had a very different life.
I mean, the way I saw 2009 was part of something that had started much, much earlier, even before 1979. I thought this was like as part of the struggle of a civil movement that was seeking justice, personal and political liberties, and ultimately democracy. And it had been moving forward, but taking baby steps. And 2009, I think, was very much what was people's desire for a better life. It's something that had started even in 1979. Was in many ways a failure because immediately the Islamists hijacked the revolution.
Well, it's fascinating how you're on the one hand growing more and more optimistic about the potential for change and so on and so forth. At the same time, you're someone who was born in Iran and got to spend, and then over the course of your life in Iran, saw, for the most part, your liberties diluted or taken away, and ultimately to the point where you felt that you had to leave the country for fear of your own life. So there are kind of two trajectories here. On the one hand, you get more and more optimistic. On the other hand, it gets worse and worse for you personally.
Yeah, I did leave. But there were a lot of younger people who went back to Iran in 2013 after President Rouhani was elected because they had hopes. And they wanted to go back to their country and be part of that positive change and the hope that was everywhere. Everybody was very optimistic that things are going to move better. So as some people like me might have had to leave the country, there have always been other Iranians who even grew up overseas. And they just went back because they wanted to discover their home country and learn about their roots.
And now, Suki Kim on her time with the Sons of North Korea's Elite. So you spent around 5-6 months in North Korea teaching the elite of North Korea. Mm-hmm. Well, tell us, let's start with that. What is the elite of North Korea?
Well, I've been visiting North Korea since 2002 as a journalist, and I quickly found that I did a piece for the New York Review of Books and Harper's. I've covered the New York Philharmonic in Pyongyang also in 2008, and I've quickly discovered that there was no way of really writing anything meaningful about North Korea unless I was embedded there. So when I found out about the school that was being privately funded and built and staffed with foreigners, I applied for a job, and then I went in 2011. The school was set up at the end of 2010, and I realized I found myself in this boarding school in a suburb of Pyongyang with 270 all-male 19 to 20-year-old young men in this compound that was guarded by military.
One of the things that you explore in your book, you don't really explore the Arab Spring because you couldn't have followed much about it. You only had access to some information, but certainly your students had access to no information.
None.
About the Arab Spring, about anything. And on a daily basis, what was that lockdown of information like for them? And again, that these are the people who would have had the best access to information among anybody their age in the whole country.
Well, I mean, they were very sheltered. You know, they didn't even know where their friends were. They were not allowed to keep in touch with their family, and they were not allowed to leave the compound. So I had access. The teachers had. We were basically separated in a faculty dormitory. None of us were allowed out, but we had access to heavily monitored internet connection and CNN Asia. And the students did not have anything at all. They didn't even know the existence of the internet. But, you know, this is sort of this vacuum that North Koreans live in anyway. No information comes in or out.
There are some cracks in that veneer where you would see moments of revelation that these kids know more than they're letting on, or they know more than they're supposed to know. At some points, you would see some little bits, right?
Because we lived together, and I think that was only possible. You know, this is why I think being embedded was so important, because you just basically get sound bites. If you ever go to North Korea to try to cover North Korea, the only way of doing that is with a government sponsorship. So you would be selling the North Korean regime's agenda, you know, being their publicist. So, but by living with them on a daily basis, and they were young, you know, 19 and 20, it's just kids. So they sometimes would slip. You know, for example, the way they celebrate their birthdays, they just gather in their dormitory room and sing because they have nothing else. And I would ask them, what kind of song do you sing? And always the answer is the same. The song about the great leader, song about friendship, song about the motherland. One time, one student said, rock and roll. The minute he said that, just the table went silent. And because I ate every meals with them. So, you know, the other students just suddenly lowered their faces, and he looked around quickly to see who heard him. And I realized this was something that should not have been said, and I changed the topic. So it's that to that degree of, you know, watchfulness and fear.
That's all for this week's abbreviated web episode of Up Close. A reminder, you can see the full episode of Up Close on the Jewish channel on cable, or listen to the full audio of the show as a podcast, available on iTunes and your favorite podcast player. The Jewish channel is available on cable: Time Warner Cable Channel 1640, IOWTLINK Channel 505, RCN Channel 268, Cox Cable Channel 1, Bright House Channel 330, Verizon Fios Channel 900, and on Comcast on the on-demand menu on premium channels. For more information, visit tjctv.com.